In this section, we're going to take a look at Stage 2, determining acceptable evidence of the 3 stages of the backward design process. So we've already taken a look at identifying the desired results, and now we're going to take a look at what is determining acceptable evidence. When we're thinking about the acceptable evidence that we're going to use, we want to think about what performances and products will reveal evidence of student understanding. So taking a look at what evidence will we actually collect for the desired results. We've identified what we want the students to learn. Now we need to look at what is it that we're going to use to determine have the students achieve those results. And really our focus is going to be on what are those valid pieces of evidence that we're going to use. J. McTeague said, what we assess signals what is important to learn, and how it is assessed signals how it should be learned. So the performances and products will reveal evidence of student understanding, what evidence will be collected for the desired results, and what performances or product will reveal evidence of student understanding. When you go back and you look at how it is assessed signals, how it should be learned, if all assessments are multiple choice, are we focused just on memorization? And then if we're just focused on that memorization, that's going to reveal how the students are going to learn it. So it's really taking into consideration on the type of evidence that we're going to collect and what we want the students to do to show their understanding. And that's going to help us build our learning experiences for the students so that they can be successful when it comes to the assessments. When we're looking at determining acceptable evidence, how will we know if the students have achieved the desired results? So after you've identified what the students need to know, we need to determine how we will know if the students learned it. There are several ways that this can be done. There is a continuum, as is shown on this slide here. There's a continuum of assessment methods that can be used in the classroom, and we need a way to gauge student learning. There is no one way to accomplish this, and it's going to be based on the task and what we want the students to do, as well as if it's more of a formative assessment or a summative assessment. At the end of a unit, we tend to look more at a summative assessment, and that tends to be tests, constructed responses, or projects. Although this is important at the end of the unit of instruction, we also need to gauge student understanding along the way. This can be done through informal checks for understanding, such as questions we ask the students during or at the end of the lesson, exit tickets, or observing students. It is important that we do these checks throughout the unit of instruction, as we need to know if the students are understanding the concepts and if reteaching is needed. We do not want to wait until the end of the lesson and then give a test to find out if there are concepts the students are struggling with. As we progress through this continuum, as we progress through the curriculum writing process, we will be looking to assess each learning experience daily. Daily assessments will be more informal, but will inform teacher concepts or skills the students are struggling with. So going back to the continuum, you have your informal check for understanding, you have observation dialogue, and then when you start getting into more of your summative, you're looking at test quizzes, constructed responses, or performance tasks or projects. So it's really taking a look at what you want to collect, what kind of evidence that you're looking to collect, and then building those assessments based on that. As you're building your assessments, there are 2 questions that you should really ask. It's like, 1, could the performance be accomplished without in-depth understanding? And could the specific performance be poor, but the students still understand the ideas in the question? So going back to the first question, could the performance be accomplished without an in-depth understanding? So if the students can get a question right without having an in-depth understanding, we need to look at, is that an effective assessment? And on the flip side of that, if the student performance is poor, but they still understand the ideas and concepts, then it's not really an effective assessment on that end as well. So our goal is to be able to answer no to both of these questions, and as we're building these assessments, going back and looking at some of these things to make sure that we have valid and reliable assessments that we're using to give us specific data. So as we talked about before, there are two types of assessments. You have formative assessments and you have summative assessments. So your formative assessments are your informal check for understanding, and these should be included with every learning experience or lesson plan that is developed. We need to know at the end if the students understand what we just taught. So if we're teaching a unit on the Civil War and we have a specific lesson within that unit about the causes of the Civil War, we don't want to wait until the end of the unit to give an assessment to find out if they understood what caused the Civil War, but rather at the end of that lesson, do a quick check to find out, did the students understand the causes of the Civil War? And you get that from that formative assessment. And that's going to tell us whether or not we need to revisit this topic with our students. Your formative assessments is not always something that's added to the grade book, and that's going to be something that's up to the teacher on whether or not that goes in the grade book. Your summative assessments are your formal assessments of student learning, and they need to be included for every unit of instruction. These are things that should be added to the grade book, and are considered common assessments and every teacher administers. So if we have 3 teachers teaching U.S. history, all 3 teachers should be giving the unit assessments as a common assessment, and we're analyzing that data together. So Jay McTeague came out and he said there are several different types of assessment methods. So you have your personal communications as one. So these are just questions that you ask during instruction, or your interviews or conversations that you have individually with students, or having the students write in journals or logs. So these are quick checks for understanding that teachers can do. And then when you're talking about performance assessment, this could be a performance task or a product or a project that the student is completing to show what they learned in that lesson. Your selected response could be multiple choice, true, false, matching, or fill in the blank. And then, of course, with your written responses, you can have a short answer or extended written response. There are many, many more types of assessments that we can give, and this is just a short snippet of some types of assessments that we can build into our curriculum. So just to give a few examples of assessments, you have those quick, fun, interactive assessments with Kahoot, quizzes, Quizizz, just to name a few that we're probably familiar with as teachers. And these are ones that are nice to use because they're digital and we don't have the grading that goes behind that because we build that in as we're doing this, and it gives us that quick, instantaneous knowledge of what the students know during our lesson. Now, although we are a one-to-one school district and we are encouraging students to use technology, we want the teachers using technology in the classroom as we're teaching lessons, it doesn't mean that every single lesson has to be technology. So I put up a couple of non-tech examples. So you have a Post-it or a Post-it poll that you can do with the students. So this is something at the end of the lesson. Maybe you're reading a passage like in this one, and then you ask the student, is this passage about persuade, inform, or is it to entertain? And then they're writing some of their responses. So this can be used for a lot of different things. Just a quick, what was the cause of the Civil War? Put on a Post-it, put it on the wall. Or maybe you have a question about who was most responsible for starting the war. And then so you have a quick Post-it poll. The students put their names and their answers on a Post-it note, and then they just put it up as they're walking out the door, and that's your quick check with that. Placemat is another one. If you're doing some group work with your students, taking a piece of paper, it's a larger poster piece of paper, and you divide it into sections based on how many students are in that group. So you can see this is an example that I did in a class, U.S. history class. And so there was a question, and individually each student had a spot to write. They wrote their name, as you can see here, and then they wrote their answer. And then we took it a step further and said after all the students wrote their answers, the students discussed it and came up with a consensus on what the group agreed upon, and then they put that in the center. And then what I had the students do is they turned this in at the end of the lesson, and then because each student wrote their name in there, I was able to go around and do a quick check to make sure the students understood. Because even though you have something in here, does that necessarily mean that every student understood those concepts? And that's why we have this that I can go back and I can check. A couple of other examples. All the students know how to tweet. Just a quick question at the end of the lesson, and then you tell them, you hand this out to them, you say, you have 140 characters to answer this question. I don't want something that's long and drawn out. I want something that's quick, and just a quick check. And this would, for an entire class, takes me just a couple of minutes just to flip through these to see how much the students actually understood. Another one that gets into some more technology again, there's a fake book that's put on by classtools.net. And with this, so if we're learning something, you get your basic information. So the students are going in, they're creating a profile page about an individual. So with this one, student created a profile page for George Washington, and they went in, they gave some basic information. And this wasn't so much what I was really looking for. I was kind of looking to like, yeah, do you know when they were born, who their family was, who their friends would be, that type of thing. But I was really looking at them writing, I think with this one they had to write 3 to 5 different posts telling about different events that George Washington was involved with. And so I was able to go through, do a quick check with this, and then so that was my quick assessment to see what they understood, especially when they're talking about the events. Were there events in here that they were talking about? Were they accurate, or was it something that I needed to go back and readdress with this? So 2 more examples in this section. So we could simply just have the kids write an exit ticket. This could be something as simple as you pose a question to the students like I have here that says, what was the most important factor that influenced the success or failure of a colony or settlement? And so this is something that I wanted quick. You can either have the students answer the question and give a couple of details to show that they understood the concept, or I would hand them either post-it notes or index cards and say that you have to fit the answer on one side, so it's just that quick check and getting right to the point. Another one that I used, and we'll take a look at this, is technology again, and students respond to a question. So with this one, we were learning about the hysteria with the Red Scare, and so we looked at the Rosenberg trial and the outcome of that. And then to make that connection back to modern day, I asked the students, how likely is something like this to happen in today's society? Consider the laws at rest, public relations, public reactions, those types of things. And so the students went through and they went on here and they just answered the question. You can see that some of them went into a lot of detail as they were writing their answers to show me that, yep, they are able to understand what happened during this time and then make that modern day connection. And then there were some that didn't put a lot of detail into it, so that's something that told me that they may not totally understand this concept and are able to transfer that knowledge to modern times. So that's one of the things that we took a look at there. So this is just another quick way that you can use something like this. So going back up to this, so really what it comes down to is there are so many different things that are out there that we can use, and it's selecting the ones that are going to be best for your class, for you, and for the students. And keeping in mind to provide some variety within this. So it's not always doing the same type of assessment every single time, but providing that variety. And so trying to give you some different ways and really thinking about what is going to be the best at determining whether or not the students understood the concepts that were taught. And that's the whole point behind determining the acceptable evidence.